Miriam Hale, the laundress lady, was saving for a ticket west. The cowboy said, "I will take you there as my wife." The summer of 1878 brought heat and dust to the town of Independence, Missouri. Wagons rattled along the streets from morning until evening, merchants called out to customers, and travelers spoke of opportunities waiting in the lands beyond the Great Plains. Yet few noticed the young woman standing beside a steaming wash kettle behind Mrs. Bennett's boarding house. Her name was Miriam Hale. At 22 years old, she had known more sorrow than many twice her age. Her hands, though young, were rough from years of scrubbing shirts, sheets, and work clothes. The skin around her fingers had cracked so many times that she no longer complained about the pain. She simply wrapped them in cloth and continued working. For Miriam had learned something precious from her late mother. Hard work is not a curse when it is done unto the Lord. Those words stayed with her. Before sunrise each morning, while most of the town still slept, Miriam would kneel beside her narrow bed and pray. "Father in heaven, thank you for another day. Give me strength to serve you. Keep my heart from bitterness and guide my steps according to your will." Then she would open her worn Bible. Its pages had become thin from years of use. Some verses were marked with tiny notes written by her mother long before sickness carried her home to heaven. After reading, Miriam would begin her day. Water had to be heated. Soap had to be prepared. Clothes had to be sorted. And by noon her arms would ache from lifting heavy buckets. Still, no one ever heard her complain. Mrs. Edith Bennett, who owned the boarding house, often shook her head in wonder. "Child, I don't believe I've ever seen anyone work as faithfully as you." Miriam would smile. "The Lord gives strength for each day." Mrs. Bennett loved the young woman like a daughter. She had watched Miriam care for her father during his long illness. She had seen the sleepless nights and the endless sacrifices. For nearly 3 years, Miriam had spent every spare coin on medicine and food while caring for her father, Henry Hale. Henry had once been a blacksmith, strong and cheerful. But fever had slowly weakened him. Even when he became too weak to stand, Miriam never abandoned him. Many nights she sat beside his bed reading psalms aloud. Sometimes she sang old hymns softly while changing cool cloths upon his forehead. And on the final evening of his life, Henry had taken her hand with trembling fingers. "My sweet girl," he had whispered, "do not let sorrow keep you from living. God has plans for you that I shall not see with earthly eyes." Tears had filled Miriam's eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Papa." He smiled weakly. "You are never alone. The Lord himself walks with you." Those were among the last words he ever spoke. After his passing, the little house felt painfully empty. No voice greeted her in the morning. No one sat beside the fireplace in the evenings. No one asked her to read from the scriptures before bedtime. For weeks, loneliness settled over her like a winter blanket. Yet even in grief, Miriam continued trusting God. She remembered Proverbs 3 verse 5. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." So she worked, and she prayed, and she waited. Unknown to everyone around her, Miriam held a secret dream. Beneath her bed rested a small wooden box. Nothing about it appeared special. But inside lay the treasure she guarded carefully. Coins, pennies, nickels, dimes. Small amounts saved over many years. Each coin represented sacrifice. Each coin carried hope. For Miriam dreamed of going west. Travelers who stopped at the boarding house often spoke of Montana Territory. They described rolling hills, snow-covered mountains, and valleys filled with wildflowers. They spoke of wide skies and fresh beginnings. Whenever she heard such stories, something stirred inside her heart. Not greed, not restlessness, but hope. Perhaps somewhere beyond the plains, God had prepared a place for her. A place where memories of loss would no longer bring tears. A place where she could build a family of her own. A place where life might begin again. At night she often unfolded an old map and traced the route west with her finger. Then she would kneel and whisper, "Lord, if it is your will, one day let me see those mountains." Month after month she added coins to the wooden box. Slowly, patiently, never wasting money, never complaining about the delay. But not everyone understood. One afternoon, while hanging sheets to dry, 2 women from town passed nearby. "Poor Miriam," one said, "still dreaming about going west." The other laughed. "She'll scrub clothes until her hair turns gray. Dreams don't fill wagons." Miriam heard every word. Their laughter stung. For a moment, discouragement tried to enter her heart. But then she remembered something her mother had often said. Never measure God's promises by other people's doubts. That evening she opened her Bible to Psalm 37. As the golden light from the setting sun shone through her window, her eyes rested upon verse 5. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. She read the verse again. And then again. A gentle peace settled over her soul. She smiled through tears. Very well, Lord, she whispered. I place my dream in your hands. If you wish me to go west, you will make a way. And if you have something better, I shall trust you. Outside, the evening breeze rustled the trees. The town grew quiet. And though Miriam did not know it, hundreds of miles away, a lonely cowboy named Nathaniel Brooks had just finished praying for something he thought heaven had forgotten. Neither of them knew that the God who sees sparrows and numbers the stars was already weaving their lives together. For sometimes the Lord answers prayers long before his children see the answer. And sometimes, while one person is saving for a journey, heaven is preparing a covenant. Nearly 1,500 miles west of Independence, Missouri, the rolling valleys of Montana Territory stretched beneath endless skies. The wind carried the scent of pine trees and fresh grass across the Brooks Ranch, where cattle grazed and horses wandered peacefully beneath the morning sun. It was a beautiful place. But beauty could not always heal loneliness. Nathaniel Brooks knew that truth all too well. At 34 years old, he was respected by neighbors and admired by the men who worked alongside him. Standing tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and hands hardened by years of honest labor, he possessed the strength of a man who had weathered many storms. Yet sorrow had carved deep lines upon his heart. Long ago, Nathaniel had dreamed of a house filled with laughter. He had married his childhood sweetheart, Rebecca. She had been gentle, cheerful, and devoted to the Lord. Together, they had prayed over their meals, read scripture beside the fireplace, and dreamed of raising children upon the land Nathaniel's father had left him. When Rebecca became with child, Nathaniel thanked God daily. He built a cradle with his own hands. He painted the tiny room. And every evening he would place his hand upon Rebecca's growing belly and speak to the child with joy. But life does not always unfold according to our plans. Complications came during childbirth. Neither Rebecca nor the baby survived. The news shattered Nathaniel. For months afterward, the once cheerful rancher became a quiet man. Neighbors worried about him. Some feared he would sell the ranch. Others wondered if he would ever smile again. But old Pastor Elijah Turner reminded him of the words of Job. The Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Nathaniel clung to God with trembling faith, not because he understood, but because he knew nowhere else to turn. Years passed. The pain became quieter, though it never completely disappeared. Then tragedy visited once more. Nathaniel's younger sister Abigail and her husband were killed by a fever that swept through their town. Their 3 children were left alone. Little Ruth was only 8. Benjamin had just turned 6. And baby Samuel was barely 3 years old. Without hesitation, Nathaniel brought them home. Neighbors offered sympathy. But many questioned his decision. A single man raising children? They whispered. That's no life for a rancher. He should send them east to relatives. Nathaniel refused. They are family, he answered. And family belongs together. The children arrived frightened and grieving. Ruth tried to be brave. Benjamin became angry and withdrawn. Little Samuel cried himself to sleep each night. Nathaniel loved them dearly, but caring for 3 wounded children while managing a ranch tested every ounce of strength he possessed. Some nights he fell asleep in his chair, still wearing his boots. Other nights he sat beside Samuel's bed singing the same hymns his mother had sung to him years before. Slowly the children adjusted. But the house remained incomplete. Not because it lacked food. Not because it lacked protection. But because it lacked a mother's touch. Ruth braided her own hair. Benjamin rarely smiled. And Samuel often asked questions that pierced Nathaniel's heart. Uncle Nate? Yes, son? When God gives children mothers, why did ours go away? Nathaniel swallowed hard. He never lied. He simply gathered the little boy into his arms. Your mama loves you very much. Then why isn't she here? Because she's with Jesus. Samuel frowned. Will Jesus give us another mama someday? Nathaniel's voice nearly broke. I don't know, little man. But deep inside the question stayed with him. Would God? For years, Nathaniel had refused to think about marriage again. Many women had shown interest. Some admired his land. Others admired his success. But none touched his heart. And truthfully he had built walls around it. The pain of losing Rebecca still lingered. He feared loving again. He feared losing again. Most of all, he feared making a mistake. One winter evening, after putting the children to bed, Nathaniel sat alone before the fireplace. Snow drifted against the windows. The old house creaked softly. His Bible rested open upon his lap. His eyes fell upon Psalm 68 verse 6. God setteth the solitary in families. He read the verse again and again. Then he bowed his head. His prayer was simple. Lord, if you desire me to remain alone, I shall obey. But if somewhere there is a woman who loves you more than she loves comfort, a woman who would love these children as her own, a woman whose heart is gentle and whose faith is strong, then bring her in your time. I will not chase after beauty alone. I ask for character. I ask for kindness. I ask for a Proverbs 31 woman. And if she exists, Lord, prepare me to be the husband she deserves. Tears filled his eyes. He had not spoken such words in years. The prayer felt strange. Yet peace followed. Not an answer. Just peace. And sometimes peace itself is God's way of saying, keep trusting. Months later, spring arrived. Business called Nathaniel eastward. Several ranchers needed cattle delivered, and supplies had to be purchased. The journey would take many weeks. Before leaving, he gathered the children around the supper table. Ruth smiled. Will you bring back peppermint sticks? Samuel clapped happily. And stories? But Benjamin, now 7, simply stared at his plate. The boy still carried hurt in his heart. Nathaniel placed a hand on his shoulder. I won't be gone forever. Benjamin finally looked up. Promise? I promise. Then little Samuel tugged his sleeve. Uncle Nate? Yes. When you come back, maybe God will send us a mama. Everyone laughed softly. Even Benjamin's lips twitched. Nathaniel smiled, though he doubted such things. Only God could perform miracles like that. Still, as he climbed into his wagon the next morning, he carried Samuel's innocent words with him. He did not know that somewhere far to the east, in a town called Independence, a young laundress knelt beside her bed every morning and prayed for God's direction. He did not know that she possessed a Bible worn by years of faith. He did not know that her kindness had already become known among strangers. And he certainly did not know that heaven had been listening to both their prayers. For while men and women see miles, God sees meetings. While people count years, God counts seasons. And while lonely hearts often wonder whether heaven has forgotten them, the Lord quietly arranges paths that cross at precisely the right time. As Nathaniel rode toward Missouri beneath the vast blue sky, he believed he was merely conducting business. But heaven knew otherwise. For the answer to his prayer was not waiting in a grand mansion, nor among wealthy families. She stood behind a wash kettle, with rough hands, a faithful heart, and a dream hidden beneath her bed. And before long, God himself would bring their roads together. By the time Nathaniel Brooks reached Independence, Missouri, summer rains had begun to fall. The journey from Montana had been long, and both he and his horse were weary. After conducting business with cattle buyers and purchasing supplies for the ranch, he planned to remain in town for only a few days before beginning the long ride home. But God often changes plans when his children least expect it. Mrs. Edith Bennett's boarding house stood on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Travelers often stopped there, for the food was warm, the beds were clean, and Mrs. Bennett herself treated strangers like family. Nathaniel arrived near sunset. Mrs. Bennett greeted him warmly. You look as though you've wrestled half the plains to get here. Nathaniel chuckled. Only dust and stubborn cattle. Well, you'll find neither on my supper table. Wash up and come inside. As he entered the dining room, his eyes drifted toward the kitchen doorway. There stood a young woman carrying a basket of freshly folded linens. Her brown hair was gathered neatly beneath a simple bonnet. She wore no jewelry and no expensive dress. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention. Yet there was something peaceful about her. Something gentle. She smiled at Mrs. Bennett. The bread should be ready shortly. Her voice was soft. Nathaniel nodded politely. She returned the greeting and continued her work. That was all. No thunder. No grand announcement. Just two strangers crossing paths. Neither realizing heaven had been preparing this moment for years. The next morning, Nathaniel rose before dawn. Old habits from ranch life had made early mornings part of his nature. As he stepped onto the porch, he stopped. The young laundress sat alone near the garden. A Bible rested upon her lap. The first rays of sunlight painted the sky with gold as she quietly read. Nathaniel immediately looked away. The moment felt too sacred to interrupt. But before returning inside, he heard her softly speak the words she had just read. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Psalm 37. His late wife Rebecca had loved that psalm. For reasons he could not explain, The verse lingered in his thoughts throughout the day. Over the next several days, Nathaniel observed many things. Not because he intended to, but because kindness cannot remain hidden for long. He saw Miriam helping Mrs. Bennet prepare meals. He noticed how she greeted guests with warmth. He watched her give half a loaf of bread to a hungry boy who had no money. And one afternoon he witnessed something that touched him deeply. An elderly widow named Mrs. Harper had arrived with a basket of clothing. Tears filled the old woman's eyes. "I'm ashamed to ask, child, but I cannot pay this week." Miriam smiled. "Then we'll settle it another time." Mrs. Harper shook her head. "I may never have the money." Miriam gently squeezed her hand. "The Lord has been good to me. Let me do this." "But you'll lose wages." Miriam smiled again. "Perhaps. But I have never gone hungry because I showed kindness." Nathaniel heard every word. And something stirred within him. Not excitement. Not romance. Respect. Deep respect. He remembered his prayer beside the fireplace months earlier. "Lord, send a woman whose heart loves you. A woman who values kindness above comfort." Could such a woman truly exist? Still he guarded his thoughts. At 34, Nathaniel had learned not to build dreams too quickly. A week later, dark clouds gathered over Independence. Heavy rain fell without mercy. Roads became rivers of mud. Businesses closed early. Many laborers lost valuable work. One evening, Miriam finished delivering clean clothing to a widow who lived across town. By the time she started home, the rain had become fierce. Thunder rolled overhead. Her umbrella offered little protection. She pulled her shawl tighter and continued walking. Then the wheel of a passing wagon struck a deep puddle. Muddy water splashed across her dress. The driver never stopped. Miriam sighed. "Well, Lord, at least the rain saves me from crying over it." Suddenly, another wagon slowed beside her. Nathaniel held the reins. "Miss Hale?" She looked up, startled. "Mr. Brooks. You'll catch pneumonia if you keep walking in this weather." "I'm nearly home." "Perhaps." He smiled kindly. "But I doubt Noah saw rain like this." Miriam laughed despite herself. The first laugh she had enjoyed all day. Nathaniel tipped his hat. "May I offer you a ride?" She hesitated. People talked. Small towns often did. Seeing her uncertainty, Nathaniel nodded respectfully. "I understand." But the thunder answered before she could. A flash of lightning sent her jumping. Nathaniel tried not to smile. "The horse is calmer than the storm, Miss Hale." She laughed again. "Very well." During the ride neither spoke much. Yet the silence felt comfortable. Not awkward. Comfortable. Rain drummed upon the wagon roof. Finally Nathaniel asked, "Mrs. Bennet tells me you've lived here many years." "Most of my life." "And your family?" "My parents are with the Lord now." "I'm sorry." She smiled softly. "I miss them. But grief becomes easier when one knows where heaven is." Nathaniel understood. More than she realized. "And you, Mr. Brooks?" "My wife passed away years ago." Miriam lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "God has been faithful." Something in his voice told her that those words had been purchased through tears. When they reached Mrs. Bennet's boarding house, Nathaniel climbed down and offered his hand. Miriam stepped carefully from the wagon. "Thank you." "No thanks needed." She smiled. "I think perhaps there are." Then she disappeared inside. Nathaniel remained beneath the rain for several moments. Not because he wished to. Because something about her peaceful spirit reminded him of a promise. Not Rebecca. No one could replace Rebecca. But perhaps God had not finished writing joy into his life. The days that followed brought many conversations. Never improper. Never hurried. Sometimes they spoke after supper. Sometimes while Mrs. Bennet shelled peas on the porch. Sometimes after church. Nathaniel learned that Miriam had spent years caring for her father. He admired her devotion. Miriam learned that Nathaniel raised 3 orphan children. Her heart softened immediately. The poor little things. They've suffered much. And you? Nathaniel smiled. We've all suffered much. For the first time in years he found himself laughing more. Smiling more. Looking forward to conversations. And Miriam found herself praying more carefully. For she knew the heart could be easily deceived. Every evening she knelt beside her bed. "Lord, protect me from foolishness. If this friendship is not from you, let it fade. But if this man walks in your ways, teach me to trust." Weeks passed. Then one Sunday afternoon after church, they sat beneath a large oak tree while children played nearby. The breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. For a moment neither spoke. Then Miriam quietly confessed something she had never told many people. I've been saving money for years. Nathaniel looked surprised. For what? To travel west. West. She nodded. I don't know why exactly. I simply believe the Lord placed the dream in my heart. Nathaniel smiled. Montana is west. She laughed softly. So I have heard. And mountains. Her eyes brightened. I've always wanted to see mountains. Nathaniel looked toward the sky, then toward the woman beside him. And for the first time since Rebecca's passing, the prayer he had prayed beside his fireplace returned with unmistakable force. Lord, if she exists, bring her in your time. Suddenly the answer no longer seemed far away. For perhaps, just perhaps, God had already brought her. And though neither of them fully understood what heaven was doing, the author of their story had already begun turning the next page. And before many more weeks had passed, Nathaniel Brooks would speak words that would leave Miriam Hale speechless. Words that neither wealth nor pride could have inspired. Words born from prayer. Words born from faith. Words that would change both their lives forever. I would rather take you west as my wife than see you travel there alone. The words Nathaniel Brooks spoke remained in Miriam's heart long after they had parted beneath the old oak tree. I would rather take you west as my wife than see you travel there alone. He had not spoken them with pride. Nor with haste. There had been no grand speeches or empty promises. Only sincerity. And somehow that made the words even more powerful. That evening, Miriam sat beside the small window in her room as twilight settled over Independence. Her wooden savings box rested on her lap. For years she had imagined purchasing a ticket west. She had counted coins by candlelight. She had sacrificed little pleasures. She had endured the laughter of those who mocked her dream. And now, a good man had offered something she had never dared ask God for. Not merely a journey, but a family. Yet Miriam knew better than to answer quickly. Marriage was sacred. It was not something to enter because of loneliness, nor because of convenience. Her parents had taught her that a husband and wife were joined by God Himself. And she intended to honor that truth. Opening her Bible, she read Proverbs 19 verse 14. A prudent wife is from the Lord. Then she knelt beside her bed. Father, I thank you for Mr. Brooks. He is kind and I believe he loves you. But if this path is not your will, close the door. And if it is your will, give me peace. I would rather wait than walk ahead of you. Outside her window, the stars appeared one by one. And though heaven remained silent, peace quietly settled upon her heart. Nathaniel was praying too. Back at the boarding house he sat alone on the porch. He had spent years making decisions about cattle, weather, and business. But this frightened him. Because hearts were far more precious than herds. He removed his hat and bowed his head. Lord, I hope I have not spoken foolishly. I care deeply for Miriam Hale. But I do not wish to hurt her. I know what grief feels like. And I know she has carried enough sorrow. If this desire comes from me alone, remove it. But if you have truly brought us together, then guide our steps. He smiled softly. And Lord, if she says no, help me remain grateful for having known such a woman. Mrs. Edith Bennet noticed immediately that something had changed. After supper the next day, she cornered Miriam in the kitchen. Out with it. Miriam nearly dropped a plate. Out with what? The smile you've been trying to hide all day. Miriam blushed. Mrs. Bennet gasped. Oh my stars. The older woman nearly hugged herself with excitement. Did that handsome cowboy finally speak? Miriam laughed. He asked for nothing yet. But he spoke honorably. Mrs. Bennet grew serious. And how does your heart answer? Miriam lowered her eyes. I don't know. Then don't rush. The older woman squeezed her hand. The Lord is never troubled by waiting. Several days later, Nathaniel asked if Miriam would walk with him after church. The sun was warm and families lingered outside greeting neighbors. They strolled slowly beneath the shade of maple trees. Finally Nathaniel stopped. Miriam, I wish to speak plainly. She nodded. I appreciate plain speaking. He smiled. Good. Then his face became serious. I have prayed for many months. And I believe the Lord brought our paths together. I love your faith. I love your kindness. And I admire your strength. But more than anything, I believe you would be a blessing to those children. His voice softened. They need a mother, Miriam. And I. He paused. I need a partner. But I ask nothing today. No promises. No hurried answer. Only that you pray. And if, after seeking God, you believe He joins our lives together, Then I would be honored to take you west as my wife. Tears filled Miriam's eyes. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because of the gentleness with which he had spoken. No pressure. No demands. Only respect. I shall pray, she whispered. And I ask the same of you. Nathaniel smiled. I already have. News travels quickly in small towns. Far too quickly. Within days, whispers spread. Some people rejoiced. Others did not. 2 women at the market shook their heads. A widower with 3 children? Poor girl. She'll spend her life changing diapers. And moving all the way to Montana? Foolishness. Another woman laughed. Perhaps she likes his ranch more than she likes him. Miriam overheard the remarks. They pierced her heart. For she loved neither wealth nor comfort. But cruel words often hurt, even when they are untrue. That evening she sat alone in tears. Mrs. Bennet found her quietly crying. My child? Miriam wiped her eyes. I'm ashamed. Of what? Those things people said. Mrs. Bennet sat beside her. Listen to me carefully. When people cannot understand God's plans, they often criticize them. Did they not criticize Noah? Did they not laugh at David? Did they not question Ruth? Miriam nodded. Then let people talk. The Lord writes stories that gossip cannot erase. Meanwhile, Nathaniel received troubling news from Montana. A letter from his foreman spoke of drought. Grass was scarce. Several cattle had grown sick. Profits were falling. One sentence troubled him deeply. Perhaps this is no time for marriage. Nathaniel sat heavily in his chair. Had he been selfish? Should he abandon the thought entirely? That night he barely slept. At dawn he walked to Pastor Samuel Grant's church. The elderly pastor welcomed him warmly. Something troubles you. Nathaniel handed him the letter. Pastor Grant read quietly. Then he looked up. Do you love her? Yes. Does she love God? Very much. Then why are you afraid? Nathaniel sighed. I do not wish to bring hardship into her life. The old pastor smiled. My son, marriage is not built upon favorable weather. It is built upon covenant. If prosperity creates a marriage, adversity will destroy it. But if God builds it, drought and storms cannot. Nathaniel lowered his head. The words settled deeply within him. For the next 2 months, both Nathaniel and Miriam waited. They prayed. They fasted. They sought counsel. And slowly, certainty replaced fear. One evening, while reading her mother's Bible, Miriam came upon Isaiah 41 verse 10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. She stopped. The verse seemed to leap from the page. Not because she heard a voice. Not because of some miracle. But because peace flooded her soul. The fear vanished. And in its place came quiet confidence. Tears ran down her cheeks. She smiled toward heaven. So this is your answer. The following Sunday, after the church service ended, Nathaniel waited beneath the maple trees. He had prepared himself for either answer. His hat rested nervously in his hands. Then he saw her approaching. Miriam's eyes shone with peace. And before he could speak, she smiled. Mr. Brooks. His heart nearly stopped. She laughed softly. I believe you may call me Miriam. He smiled. I should like that. She took a deep breath. I have prayed. And I have waited. And I believe the Lord has written our names upon the same page. Nathaniel blinked away tears. Miriam? She smiled through tears of her own. Yes. For a moment, neither spoke. Neither needed to. Because some answers are too sacred for many words. And somewhere above, the God who had heard a lonely cowboy's prayer and a laundress's whispered dreams smiled upon 2 faithful hearts. For he had not simply prepared a journey west. He had prepared a covenant. And soon, before family and friends, they would stand together and promise before God. For better or worse. For richer or poorer. Until death parted them. Not knowing that their greatest trials, and their greatest blessings, still lay ahead. Autumn arrived in Independence with cool mornings and leaves painted in shades of gold and crimson. For Miriam Hale, every sunrise seemed brighter than before. Not because life had suddenly become easy. Not because every fear had disappeared. But because peace had taken the place of uncertainty. She and Nathaniel Brooks had sought the Lord together. And now, with thankful hearts, they prepared to enter the sacred covenant of marriage. Mrs. Edith Bennet declared herself responsible for nearly everything. No woman under my roof shall marry without flowers and a proper cake, she announced. And no argument from either of you. Nathaniel wisely chose not to argue. Miriam only laughed. Mrs. Bennet, you spoil me. Nonsense, the older woman replied. I've waited years to see you smile this much. Word spread through the town. Many who had once doubted the match now softened. Others still whispered. But neither Nathaniel nor Miriam paid much attention. For when God gives peace, the opinions of others lose much of their power. Pastor Samuel Grant agreed to perform the ceremony. Marriage, he often reminded young couples, is not merely a promise made between two people. It is a covenant witnessed by heaven. And neither Nathaniel nor Miriam took that lightly. The night before the wedding, Miriam sat alone in her room. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. Her eyes fell upon the little wooden box beneath her bed. Slowly she lifted it onto her lap. How many tears had she shed while placing coins inside? How many dreams had rested in that box? For years it had represented hope. A hope of traveling west. A hope of beginning again. A hope of escaping loneliness. She opened the lid. The coins gleamed softly. Then tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but gratitude. Father, she whispered toward heaven, thinking of her late earthly father. You were right. God truly had plans for me. She smiled through her tears. And they are better than anything I imagined. Opening her Bible, she read Psalm 84 verse 11. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. Closing her eyes, she bowed her head. Thank you, Lord. Their wedding day arrived beneath clear blue skies. Neighbors gathered inside the little church. Fresh flowers decorated the altar. Children ran about excitedly. Mrs. Bennet dabbed her eyes every few minutes. I promised myself I wouldn't cry, she announced. No one believed her. Nathaniel stood beside Pastor Grant. For a man who had faced storms, blizzards, and stampeding cattle, he had never felt so nervous. Pastor Grant chuckled. Son, you look like you're about to wrestle a grizzly bear. Nathaniel smiled weakly. I think I'd rather wrestle the bear. The old pastor laughed. Then the church doors opened. And Miriam entered. The entire room grew quiet. She wore a simple cream-colored dress. Nothing expensive. Nothing grand. Yet Nathaniel had never seen anyone more beautiful. Not because of lace. Not because of fashion. But because peace shone upon her face. As she approached, his eyes grew misty. And for the first time since Rebecca's death, he felt something he thought had been buried forever. Hope. Pastor Grant spoke from Ecclesiastes. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. Then he looked lovingly at the couple. Marriage is not built upon perfect days. It is built upon faith. It is built upon forgiveness. And above all, it is built upon Christ. Nathaniel and Miriam exchanged vows. Not grand promises of endless happiness, but promises of faithfulness. Promises to pray together. To bear one another's burdens. To trust God through seasons both joyful and painful. And when Pastor Grant finally declared them husband and wife, even Mrs. Bennet's handkerchief surrendered. She cried openly. So did half the congregation. That evening, after the celebration ended, Miriam carried the little wooden box to Nathaniel. He recognized it immediately. The savings? She nodded. I no longer need them. Nathaniel smiled gently. You earned every coin. And every dream. Miriam laughed softly. Perhaps. But I don't need to buy a ticket west anymore. Nathaniel's eyes shone with tenderness. No, ma'am. Taking her hands, he smiled. The Lord provided better transportation. They both laughed. Then he added softly. And he provided me with far more than I deserve. The journey west lasted several weeks. They crossed rivers, passed through valleys, and spent evenings beneath stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Each morning began with prayer. Each evening ended with scripture. And every mile brought them closer to Montana. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they shared old memories. Sometimes they rode in comfortable silence. And slowly two separate lives became one. Yet as they approached the Brooks Ranch, Miriam noticed something unusual. Nathaniel had grown quieter. Almost nervous. Finally she smiled. You've been worried all day. He chuckled. Have I become that easy to read? You forget I wash stains for a living. I notice things. He laughed. Then his expression softened. The children. Miriam nodded. They don't know me. They've suffered much. They may not welcome you. She reached for his hand. They don't need to love me immediately. They've already lost enough. I'll wait. Nathaniel squeezed her hand gratefully. At sunset, the ranch finally came into view. Rolling hills stretched beneath the golden sky. Mountains stood in the distance. And for a moment, Miriam forgot to breathe. The mountains, she whispered. Nathaniel smiled. You finally made it west. Tears filled her eyes. They're even more beautiful than I imagined. But before she could admire them further, 3 children came running from the house. Little Samuel raced ahead. Uncle Nate. Ruth followed close behind. And Benjamin hung back near the porch. Nathaniel climbed down and opened his arms. The children embraced him tightly. Samuel immediately looked toward Miriam. His eyes widened. Who's that? Nathaniel smiled. Come here, son. The little boy obeyed. Kneeling beside him, Nathaniel said gently, Samuel, this is Miriam. The child tilted his head. The mama God promised? Nathaniel blinked. The what? Samuel smiled. I asked Jesus to send us one. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. Ruth stared quietly. Benjamin crossed his arms. And suddenly, Samuel threw his tiny arms around Miriam's waist. Welcome home. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Benjamin. The boy remained near the porch, silent, watching. His wounded heart was not yet ready. Miriam noticed, and she understood. Love could not be forced. Trust would take time, patience, and prayer. As darkness settled over the ranch that evening, Miriam stood beside her husband and gazed at the mountains she had dreamed of for so many years. The Lord had brought her west, but more importantly, He had brought her home. She simply did not yet realize that the greatest work awaiting her was not caring for a ranch, nor cooking meals, nor washing clothes. It was helping heal 3 broken hearts. And one of those hearts, young Benjamin Brooks, would prove to be the hardest of all. The first weeks at the Brooks Ranch were filled with new beginnings. Each morning, the mountains greeted Miriam with their beauty. Each evening, she thanked God for bringing her farther than she had ever dreamed possible. But she quickly discovered that dreams and daily life were not always the same thing. The ranch was not a fairy tale. It was work. Hard work. Before sunrise, she prepared breakfast for a household larger than any she had ever known. There were biscuits to bake, eggs to fry, clothes to mend, and endless chores waiting around every corner. And yet, Miriam embraced it all with joy. Not because she enjoyed every task, but because she believed that service itself was a form of worship. Whatever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord. Those words from Scripture guided her days. Little Samuel adored her almost immediately. The 5-year-old followed her everywhere. He asked endless questions. Why do chickens walk funny? Does heaven have horses? Can Jesus see me when I'm hiding? His innocent curiosity often left Nathaniel laughing. One evening, Samuel climbed into Miriam's lap and asked, Mama Miriam, if God made mountains, does that mean He likes big things? She kissed the top of his head. I believe He likes beautiful things. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Then He must really like you. Nathaniel nearly choked on his coffee. And even Ruth burst into laughter. But Benjamin said nothing. He rarely did. At 8 years old, Benjamin carried grief like a grown man. He spoke only when necessary. And whenever Samuel called Miriam Mama, Benjamin's face darkened. He never argued. He simply withdrew, which somehow hurt more. One afternoon, Miriam found him sitting alone beneath a cottonwood tree. His Bible rested unopened beside him. She approached quietly. Mind if I sit? He shrugged. She sat without speaking. For several minutes, neither said a word. Finally, Miriam smiled. Your uncle says you're the best fisherman in Montana. Benjamin stared at the river. He exaggerates. I hear you're also good with horses. Silence. And that you're stubborn. The boy looked at her. For the first time in days. Uncle Nate said that? She laughed. No. But I have eyes. A tiny smile appeared. Then vanished. Suddenly Benjamin's expression hardened. Don't try. Try what? To replace my mother. The words pierced her heart. But she had expected them. I couldn't replace her if I wanted to. His eyes narrowed. Then why are you here? Miriam's voice remained gentle. Because God brought me. I didn't ask Him to. No. She nodded. You didn't. The boy's eyes filled with angry tears. I already had a mother. Miriam swallowed her own tears. And she must have loved you very much. Benjamin's voice cracked. She did. Then I think she'd be very proud of the young man you're becoming. He stood abruptly. You're wrong. And he ran toward the barn. Miriam remained beneath the tree. Not offended. Not angry. Only saddened. That evening, Nathaniel found her reading her Bible by lamplight. Benjamin? She nodded. He misses his mother. Nathaniel sighed heavily. He blames God. And perhaps me. You? He thinks I forgot her. Miriam reached for his hand. You haven't. No. His voice broke. I haven't. Then neither has he. Together they prayed for the boy, not knowing how much those prayers would matter. As autumn faded into winter, trouble arrived. Rain stopped. Pastures dried. The streams became shallow. The drought that Nathaniel had feared grew worse. Cattle grew thin. Prices fell. Neighbors worried. And for the first time since their marriage, Nathaniel's smile became difficult to find. He studied ledgers late into the night. He spoke less. He slept little. Miriam noticed, but she said nothing. Instead she prayed. One evening she quietly placed his supper beside him. You forgot to eat. Nathaniel rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. He sighed. I fear I've brought you into hardship. She smiled. My husband, I married you. Not favorable weather. Those words brought tears to his eyes, for they echoed Pastor Grant's wisdom. Marriage was not built upon prosperity. It was built upon covenant. The weeks became harder. A sickness spread among some cattle. 2 calves died. Bills increased. Even cheerful Samuel sensed the tension. One night after prayers, little Ruth spoke softly. Are we poor? Nathaniel forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Then why do you look sad? No one answered. But Miriam did. Because sometimes grown-ups forget that God is bigger than their worries. Samuel grinned. Like David and Goliath? Exactly. The boy nodded confidently. Then God will win. Nathaniel smiled weakly. Out of the mouths of children. Christmas came quietly that year. There were no expensive presents. No grand celebration. Only homemade gifts and simple meals. Still, Miriam insisted upon decorating. Pine branches filled the house. Candles glowed in the windows. And every evening the family gathered to read the story of Christ's birth. Benjamin sat apart from the others. Listening. Watching. Still resisting. But something was changing. Slowly. Quietly. Like snow falling upon the mountains. Then came the accident. Benjamin's horse stumbled near the creek. The boy was thrown hard onto the rocks. A ranch hand carried him home unconscious. Nathaniel nearly collapsed with fear. Miriam immediately took charge. Cold cloths. Warm blankets. Medicines. Prayer. For 3 days and nights she scarcely slept. She remained beside Benjamin's bed constantly. Reading scripture. Changing bandages. Whispering prayers. And when exhaustion threatened to overcome her, she remembered the countless nights she had spent caring for her father. God had prepared her long ago. On the 4th night, Benjamin finally awoke. His eyes blinked weakly. Mama? The word slipped out before he realized it. Miriam froze. Benjamin froze. And tears filled both their eyes. He quickly looked away. I didn't mean. But Miriam simply smiled. You don't have to explain. The boy began crying. Not the tears of anger she had seen before. But tears of sorrow. Years of sorrow. I miss her. I know. I don't want to forget her. You won't. What if she thinks I replaced her? Miriam's own tears fell freely. Oh, Benjamin. She stroked his hair gently. Love doesn't replace love. It grows. Your mother will always be your mother. And nothing, not even heaven itself, can take that away. The boy sobbed against her shoulder. And for the first time since his parents died, he allowed himself to be held. At that very moment, Nathaniel stood quietly in the doorway. Tears streamed down his face. For the prayer he had spoken beside his fireplace years earlier had finally been answered. God had indeed sent a woman who loved his children. Not because she had to, but because love lived within her. As winter gave way to spring, the atmosphere within the house changed. Benjamin laughed again. Samuel sang loudly. Ruth smiled more often. And every evening Miriam gathered them together around the Bible. Soon even the ranch hands joined. Scripture was read. Hymns were sung. Prayers rose from grateful hearts. One by one, neighbors began attending. They spoke in amazement. The Brooks ranch feels different. And it was. Not because miracles had fallen from the sky. Not because money had suddenly appeared. But because peace had entered the home. And peace is one of heaven's sweetest miracles. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Nathaniel stood on the porch watching his family laugh together. Benjamin sat beside Miriam. Samuel chased chickens. Ruth braided flowers into a crown. Nathaniel wrapped an arm around his wife. I prayed for a wife. He smiled. But the Lord sent revival. Miriam laughed softly. Then perhaps we should thank him. They bowed their heads together. not knowing another storm was approaching. One that would threaten everything they possessed. One that would bring them to their knees. And one that would reveal that God's faithfulness shines brightest, not after the storm, but in the middle of it. Spring had brought healing to the hearts within the Brooks household. But beyond the warmth of their home, trouble still lingered over the land. The drought had weakened the ranch. Several cattle had been lost. Money had become scarce. And though Nathaniel tried to hide his worries, Miriam knew her husband too well. At night, after the children had gone to bed, she often found him sitting quietly on the porch. His Bible rested unopened on his lap. His eyes remained fixed upon the dark mountains. One evening, she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and sat beside him. "You are carrying too much alone." Nathaniel sighed. "I keep asking myself what more I should have done." "You have done all you could. What if it isn't enough?" Miriam smiled softly. "Then perhaps God wishes to show us what he can do." Nathaniel chuckled faintly. "You always make faith sound simple." "No." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Faith isn't simple. It is surrender." Winter arrived earlier than expected, and with it came disaster. The first blizzard struck in November. Then another. And another. Snow buried fences. Ice covered the water troughs. The wind howled day and night. Even the strongest ranchers admitted they had never seen weather so cruel. One terrible morning, Nathaniel and the ranch hands returned with grim faces. Several cattle had frozen during the night. Ruth burst into tears. Samuel clung to Miriam's dress. And Benjamin stared silently at the floor. Nathaniel removed his hat and sat heavily in his chair. For the first time since Miriam had known him, she saw defeat in his eyes. "We may lose everything." No one spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside the storm raged. Then little Samuel climbed onto Nathaniel's lap. "But God still has everything." The room fell silent. Nathaniel blinked rapidly. And suddenly Benjamin spoke. "Samuel's right." Everyone turned. The boy swallowed hard. "We prayed when I was hurt. And God helped. We prayed when Mama Miriam came. And God answered. Maybe we should pray now." Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears. For months he had carried burdens meant for God's shoulders. And now his son was reminding him where hope truly came from. That night the entire family knelt together. Not for 5 minutes. Not from routine. But with desperate hearts. Nathaniel prayed first. "Lord, I confess that fear has become greater in my mind than your promises. Forgive me. We place this ranch in your hands. If we keep it, it belongs to you. And if we lose it, we still belong to you." Then Ruth prayed. Then Samuel. Then Benjamin. And finally Miriam. "Heavenly Father, you fed Elijah beside the brook. You fed thousands with loaves and fishes. You have never abandoned your children. Teach us to trust you." When they rose from their knees, the storm outside had not stopped. But peace had entered the room. And peace itself was a miracle. Weeks later, disaster struck again. Part of the main barn collapsed beneath heavy snow. Nathaniel stood in the freezing wind staring at the damage. His shoulders slumped. Years of labor seemed to lie in ruins. Benjamin quietly walked beside him. The boy, now older and wiser, placed a hand on his uncle's arm. "Papa?" Nathaniel looked up. The word caught him by surprise. Benjamin blushed. But Nathaniel pulled him into a hug. "No." His voice trembled. "You said it right." For years Nathaniel had waited. And now, through tears and hardship, another prayer had been answered. Benjamin smiled. "We'll rebuild." Nathaniel laughed softly through his tears. "With what?" Benjamin grinned. "With help." Neither knew how true those words would become. 3 days later, wagons began appearing. First came old Mr. Peterson. Then the Johnson brothers. Then neighbors from miles away. Men brought lumber. Women brought food. Children carried supplies. By afternoon, nearly half the valley had gathered. Nathaniel stood speechless. "What is all this?" Old Mr. Peterson laughed. "You've spent years helping others. It's our turn." Another rancher grinned. "And your wife has fed half the county. We figured we'd return the favor." For days, the sound of hammers echoed through the valley. Fences were repaired. The barn was rebuilt. Food was shared. Laughter returned. And Nathaniel stood amazed. Sometimes God's miracles arrive with angels. Sometimes they arrive wearing muddy boots. As winter slowly loosened its grip, signs of hope appeared. Snow melted. Grass returned. Healthy calves were born. Rain finally came. Not too much. Not too little. Just enough. Nathaniel stood beneath the downpour laughing like a boy. Samuel danced in puddles. Ruth spun in circles. Benjamin raised his hands toward heaven. And Miriam stood on the porch smiling. The Lord had carried them through. Not around the storm. Through it. One evening, months later, Nathaniel and Miriam sat together watching the sunset. The mountains glowed orange and gold. Birds sang softly. And peace filled the air. Nathaniel took her hand. You know, years ago I thought God had finished writing joy into my life. Miriam smiled. But. He laughed. But he was simply turning the page. She squeezed his hand. And I thought I was saving for a ticket. Instead, the Lord gave me a family. Nathaniel kissed her forehead. And he gave me a reason to laugh again. At that moment, Miriam hesitated. There may be one more blessing. Nathaniel looked puzzled. What do you mean? Tears sparkled in her eyes. Samuel is not going to be the youngest much longer. For several seconds, Nathaniel simply stared. Then understanding dawned. His eyes widened. Miriam? She laughed through happy tears. We're going to have a baby. Nathaniel covered his face and wept. Not the tears of sorrow he had shed years before. These were tears of gratitude. Tears only God could bring. He knelt beside her chair. His voice trembling. Lord, after all you've done, you still give more. 9 months later, the entire ranch celebrated. Ruth could hardly contain herself. Samuel announced the news to every chicken, horse, and ranch hand within sight. Benjamin stood proudly beside his father. And when the midwife finally placed a tiny baby girl into Miriam's arms, Nathaniel's heart overflowed. She's beautiful, he whispered. Little Samuel looked thoughtful. What's her name? Nathaniel looked toward his wife. Miriam smiled. Grace. Samuel nodded seriously. That's a good name. Because God gave her to us. Everyone laughed. And indeed she was Grace. Not because she was perfect, but because she reminded them of something they had learned through storms, tears, and prayers. Everything good in their lives had come from the hand of God. And as Nathaniel held his daughter and looked upon the family surrounding him, he realized something wonderful. Years earlier he had prayed for a wife. But God had given him far more. A home, children, joy, laughter, hope, and a legacy that would outlive them all. For the Lord delights in giving his children more than they dare imagine. And though many years still lay ahead, one truth had become certain. The greatest blessings in life are not possessions. They are people. And the God who brought a lonely cowboy and a faithful laundress together had only one chapter left to write. A chapter filled with grandchildren, quiet sunsets, and a love that would endure until heaven itself. The years passed more quickly than either Nathaniel or Miriam Brooks imagined. Seasons came and went. Winters covered the mountains with snow. Spring covered the valleys with flowers. Summer brought laughter to the riverbanks. And autumn painted the ranch with colors so beautiful that visitors often stood in silence just to admire God's handiwork. Yet Nathaniel had learned something through the years. The greatest beauty on the Brooks Ranch was never the mountains. It was the people gathered around his table. For the Lord had filled his once lonely house with life. Little Grace grew into a cheerful young girl whose smile reminded everyone of her mother. Samuel remained curious and joyful, always asking questions that made the entire family laugh. Ruth became a gentle young woman with her mother's kindness and her Aunt Miriam's wisdom. And Benjamin, the boy who had once guarded his broken heart so fiercely, had become a strong and honorable man. Many evenings, Nathaniel would sit on the porch and watch his children laughing together. Then he would glance at Miriam. And without saying a word they would both smile. Because God had answered prayers neither of them had known how to pray. Benjamin especially became a source of great joy. One evening, years after the terrible accident that had brought them together, he joined Miriam on the porch. She was shelling peas into a bowl while the setting sun painted the mountains gold. Benjamin sat quietly beside her. Mama? She looked up and smiled. The word no longer surprised her. It had become one of her greatest treasures. Yes, son? Benjamin lowered his eyes. I don't say this enough. You don't have to. But I want to. His voice trembled. When Uncle Nate brought you here, I was angry. I know. I thought loving you meant forgetting my mother. Miriam gently touched his hand. And now? Tears filled his eyes. Now I know that God gave me two mothers. One who brought me into the world. And one who helped me live again. Miriam's own tears spilled freely. Before she could answer, Benjamin embraced her. And as she held him, she silently thanked the Lord for the years it had taken to heal his wounded heart. Some miracles happened in moments. Others happened slowly. but both were miracles just the same. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman. Samuel eventually became a preacher, traveling to small towns and sharing the gospel with anyone willing to listen. Whenever people praised his sermons, he would laugh. You should have heard Mama Miriam. She preached with biscuits and kindness. Ruth married a schoolteacher who loved the Lord. And Benjamin became a rancher like his father. When he married, he asked Nathaniel to stand beside him. But before the ceremony began, Benjamin surprised everyone. He turned toward Miriam. Would you walk with me? Tears immediately filled her eyes. Me? He smiled. Every son should have his mother beside him. Nathaniel quietly wiped his eyes. Even the pastor reached for his handkerchief. And throughout the ceremony, Miriam could scarcely stop crying. Years earlier, she had feared Benjamin might never accept her. Now he honored her before the entire valley. God truly restores what sorrow tries to destroy. Before long, the house became noisy again. Grandchildren arrived. Tiny feet raced across the wooden floors. Little voices filled every room. And somehow Miriam found herself baking twice as many biscuits as before. One afternoon, 6-year-old Abigail Brooks climbed into her grandmother's lap. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Were you always Grandpa's wife? Nathaniel nearly laughed himself out of his chair. No, ma'am. Abigail frowned. Then where did Grandpa find you? Samuel burst out laughing. But Nathaniel smiled. Well, now that's quite a story. And as he had done countless times before, he told the tale. How a young laundress had once dreamed of going west. How she had saved every coin. How God had brought their paths together. And how heaven had written a story better than either of them could have imagined. When he finished, little Abigail blinked. So Grandma was waiting for Grandpa? Nathaniel grinned. No. Grandpa was waiting for Grandma. Everyone laughed. Especially Miriam. One evening, many years later, the two of them sat alone on the porch. Their hair had turned silver. Their hands had grown wrinkled. But their love had only deepened. The mountains stood as faithfully as they had on the day Miriam first arrived. Nathaniel reached for her hand. Do you remember your little wooden box? She laughed softly. I do. I remember wondering if I would ever save enough. Nathaniel smiled. You know something? What? I'm thankful you never bought that ticket. She laughed. And I'm thankful you came east. For several moments neither spoke. The sounds of grandchildren playing drifted from the yard. Birds sang in the trees. And the sun slowly sank behind the mountains. Finally Nathaniel said quietly, I once believed God had forgotten me. Miriam squeezed his hand. So did I. But he hadn't. No. She smiled. He was preparing something. Nathaniel nodded. Something better. As the years advanced, their steps became slower. Yet they never abandoned their evening prayers. Never abandoned the scriptures. Never abandoned gratitude. Neighbors often asked them the secret to a happy marriage. Nathaniel always answered the same way. Put God first. And forgive quickly. Miriam would add. And never stop praying for each other. Those simple truths became the legacy they passed on to their children and grandchildren. Not wealth. Not land. Faith. One autumn evening while watching the sunset, Nathaniel smiled toward his wife. Thank you. She looked surprised. For what? For saying yes. Tears filled her eyes. My dear husband, we both said yes. He chuckled. No. We said yes to God. And he did the rest. They sat quietly together. No grand speeches. No regrets. Only peace. The peace that comes from a life surrendered to the Lord. And though they knew their earthly journey would not last forever, neither feared the future. For the same God who had guided them through loneliness, grief, drought, storms, and joy would also guide them home. And one day, beyond the mountains Miriam had once dreamed of seeing, beyond the sunsets they loved so dearly, beyond the years themselves, they would walk together again in that heavenly country whose builder and maker is God, where there would be no tears, no sorrow, no parting, only everlasting joy. And whenever their grandchildren told the story of the Brooks family, they always ended with the same words. The laundress thought she was saving for a ticket west. But God was preparing a covenant. And his plans were far more beautiful than her dreams. Moral lesson. When we place our hopes in God's hands, we may discover that his answers are greater than our expectations. He does not merely grant journeys, he builds families, heals broken hearts, and writes stories that glorify him. Those who wait upon the Lord will never be disappointed by his perfect timing.